All right, welcome to this special news bulletin. Today, we're going to break down the incredibly complex events that are unfolding in and around Iran right now. It's a story that weaves together massive protests, a teetering economy, and, believe it or not, a really surprising show of technological power. Okay, let's just dive right in. The whole thing really kicks off with this huge surge of public anger. I mean, get this. On January 2nd, a single day, anti-regime protests were recorded in more than 70 cities all across Iran. And look, we're not talking about just one or two hotspots here. The unrest has exploded, spreading to 22 of Iran's 31 provinces. That's a massive geographic scope, and it shows just how fast and how widespread this public dissent has become. In, just a week? You know what's gotten serious when it's not just the people on the streets. Even senior Shia clerics like Grand Ayatollah Hamadani are coming out and publicly saying, yeah, people are fed up. They're pointing directly to the economic pain, the high prices, the worthless currency as the real fuel for these demonstrations. So let's take a closer look at how this is all spreading, because as it grows, the protests themselves are becoming a lot more confrontational. I mean, just look at the growth here. The acceleration is just staggering. We're seeing the number of daily protests more than double in just 2 days. It goes from 31 on New Year's Eve all the way up to 70 by January 2nd. That's an incredible rate of expansion. And what's interesting is where this is happening. The most intense clashes aren't in the big cities, but outside of them, and it's getting violent. When the state uses force, protesters are hitting back by targeting symbols of the regime, setting fire to security vehicles, seminary buildings. And on the flip side, we have documented reports of security forces using lethal force, killing protesters in at least 5 different locations. Okay, so as all this is boiling over inside Iran, something happens thousands of miles away that throws a whole new, really volatile ingredient into the mix. On January 3rd, the U.S. military carries out an operation in Venezuela and captures their president, Nicolas Maduro. And the U.S. president doesn't mince words, basically framing it as a direct effort to change the regime there. So you can bet Tehran was watching this very, very closely. They immediately saw the parallels to their own situation. And when the U.S. started commenting on the protests in Iran, the regime fired back with some pretty direct threats against American bases and forces in the Middle East. The official line from Iran's foreign ministry was to condemn the U.S. attack on Venezuela. They called it a blatant violation of sovereignty, essentially positioning themselves as defenders of international law and warning that this kind of action just destabilizes everything. But to really get why people are so angry on the streets of Iran, you have to look at the economy. I mean, it is just crippling for the average person. This table really tells the story. Officially, the government says the exchange rate is about 280,000 reals to the dollar. But on the free market, where regular people actually have to buy things, it's 1.35 million. That is a massive, almost 5-fold difference. And that huge gap? Well, experts say it's a perfect recipe for corruption. And these aren't just abstract numbers, right? This is the daily struggle for survival. We're talking 30 to 40% inflation year after year, a quarter of the population unemployed, and another 40% underemployed. The cost of food is skyrocketing. Bread went up 15% in just 1 month. It's so bad that a prominent Sunni cleric basically said Iranians' lives have reached a dead end. The desperation has gotten so extreme that it's even hitting state employees. That quote, "I have nothing to lose," that's from an Iranian police officer. He posted a video trying to sell his own kidney just to get by. And he's not an isolated case. We've got reports of an air defense officer with 17 years of service making the equivalent of just $119 a month. Just think about that. This collapse is just gutting entire industries. I mean, take the Persian carpet industry. It's not just a business in Iran, it's part of their soul, their national identity. 30 years ago, it was a $2 billion a year export industry. Today, they're expecting less than 40 million. One industry leader just called it practically zero. It's been wiped out. And yet, while all of this is happening, the protests, the economic freefall, the regime is projecting a completely different image to the rest of the world. An image of strength, of power, of technological achievement. And this is the perfect example of that dual reality. Iran just successfully launched 3 satellites into orbit, all designed and built at home. You've got the Zafar 2 for monitoring resources, the Paya, which is their heaviest yet, and the Kalsar for IoT stuff. For the officials, this is a huge win, a major technological leap forward. It's their way of telling the world and their own citizens, hey, we're still powerful, we're still advancing. So here's the core paradox, right? The satellites were launched from Russia, but they were designed and built entirely using Iranian tech. And that's a genuine point of pride. But you have this government that's showing off its high-tech space program, while its people on the ground are literally struggling to afford bread. It's a jarring contrast. So this all leads to the big question, the really critical one. What happens next? Where does Iran go from here? Well, to try and figure that out, a lot of analysts are actually looking back at that Venezuela situation. They're seeing these potential roadmaps. Could there be a negotiated handover, or some of the elites defect for amnesty, or maybe an internal takeover by figures working behind the scenes? Or does it go the other way into a long, drawn-out guerrilla conflict? These are the scenarios they're gaming out. So you have this perfect storm, right? Internal protests, economic collapse, and external pressure all crashing into the regime's projection of power. It really feels like the Islamic Republic is facing one of its biggest tests ever. And the real question isn't just what comes next, but which of these two completely different realities, the one of a street or the one in orbit, is going to win out and define Iran's future.